I'll ask Braden to make a couple of protocol announcements in a minute before I introduce our speaker. But first, let me just say that I'm the Ian G. Barber Professor of Theology and Science at the Graduate Theological Union here in Berkeley, California, and the founder and director of the Center for Theology and Natural Sciences. And it's an exciting time for us because this fall, 2021, will enter our 40th anniversary. We began in 1981, if you can remember back that far. And so 40 years as part of this growing international, interfaith, intercultural, and interdisciplinary program of theology and science. So our mission at CTNS is to support and contribute to the creative mutual interaction between theology and science. And I mean that in an ecumenical, Christian ecumenical, an interfaith, and an interdisciplinary way. Those are threefold layering of the word theology, which also reflects the GTU. I think it's a nice fit. The mission includes three parts: research, teaching, and public service. And the forums are one of our main avenues for public service to bring the good news to the wider, now truly international public in real time. So it's very exciting for us. And I'm delighted to see so many of you here tonight. Thanks for coming. Let me just say, I'll introduce the speaker in a minute and we'll get on with it, but I'm going to ask Braden if you want to give us some protocol about what's going to happen tonight.
Sure, thanks, Bob. During the talk, I'm going to ask that everybody remain muted. Feel free to stay up on camera. You can put speaker view on yourself if you'd like to just see the speaker, or you can keep it on gallery view if you'd like to see other people. When the talk gets going, I will also be posting a link to a file in chat. Oh, I'm getting a little bit of feedback now, so I'm going to go ahead and mute people for right now. Okay. Yeah, so I wasn't able to upload this file directly, but this is a file the speaker would like us to, people can follow along with during the talk. So I'll throw that link up a couple times in the chat to Dropbox. You should be able to just click on the link and download it and open it up. If you have problems with that, feel free to send me a message in the chat. And then when we get to the end of the talk, we'll have a time for question and answer. And the easiest way for me to handle that is to just call on people. So if you have a question or you'd like to say something, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says reactions. And if you click on that, there's a hand that's straight up that says raise hand. And if you do that, you can see on the top left of my screen, my hand is now up. I will be able to see that, and I can mark when I see people and call on people accordingly in order. If you're not able to find that or you're not able to do that, feel free to send me a private chat or to say that you'd like to ask a question in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that as well and do my best to try and get as many people to interact with the speakers as we can. So if you have any questions throughout the time, please feel free to send me a private message, or if you can't do that, just throw it in the chat and I'll see what I can do to help.
Thanks, Braden. Before we start further, I want to thank Melissa and Braden. Melissa, who did great work organizing the Zoom invitations and getting us all on board to be here. Thank you. And Braden, who will host the procedure as you now see, and the Q&A session. That's just a great help. Really appreciate that, Braden. Okay, friends, Junghyung Kim is a GTU graduate. He wrote his Ph.D. dissertation on, quote, cosmic hope in a scientific age 10 years ago. He is now teaching as an associate professor at Presbyterian University and Theological Seminary in Seoul, South Korea. His recent publications include way too many to read, but some of the highlights from my point of view are 6 different theological responses to the scientific prediction of the decaying universe 2 years ago, Toward a Theology of Cosmic Hope from Theo-anthropology to Theo-cosmology 3 years ago, and The Doctrine of Creation, Belief in the Creator in an Age of Science 2019 in Korean. I'm really proud to say that he received the first prize in an international competition sponsored by the ISSR, the International Society for Science and Religion. And it was an essay competition in honor of John Polkinghorne, a beloved pioneer in the field who has recently died. And the prize, Jung, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was $10,000. And you went to Oxford where you received the prize, and I was very proud to be your sponsor. It was just a great event. He also received our Charles H. Towns Graduate Student Fellowship in Theology and Science in 2009 from CTNS. His talk's title is The Doctrine of Atonement and Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Let me just say thanks to my dear colleague Ted Peters, who is the primary editor. Here's a recent publication from a team of us. Science, Astrotheology, Science and Theology Meet Extraterrestrial Life. And I think it would serve as a good background for Junghyung's presentation today. So I urge you to think about getting it. Now, with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Hongjo. And thank you so much for doing this for us. It's just a privilege to have you speak for us. And I'm so grateful for our almost 20 years of friendship. So please take over.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. This is Junghyung Kim from Seoul, South Korea. I'm happy to see you all in a real-time meeting, though I'm physically far away from you all. Can you hear me well? Okay. Also, I feel greatly honored to be invited to speak at the CTNS public lecture. It's almost 10 years ago that I finished my doctoral thesis under the supervision of my beloved teachers, Ted and Bob. I still miss a lot those lab meetings that I had at the CTNS with brilliant colleagues. Before the COVID-19, I had never expected that I may be reconnected to CTNS in this way. Ironically, this pandemic brought me an unexpected gift. Though somewhat excited and nervous, I'm now going to begin the lecture. And the title is, as you all know, The Doctrine of Atonement and Extraterrestrial Life. Braden has just uploaded a file to chatting room. You can download it. It contains a brief outline of the lecture and quotations from other authors I will mention during the lecture. So you can refer to it anytime you want. The scientific revolution in the 15th century, especially in the field of astronomy, challenged the ancient Ptolemaic universe from two perspectives. First, by moving the Earth away from the center, and second, by opening the eyes to a vast universe. This expanded vision of a vast universe, once coupled with the principle of plenitude, encouraged the idea of many worlds, even many inhabited worlds. For Christians who believed in the atoning death of Jesus Christ as the incarnate Son of God, the hypothesis of other inhabited worlds than ours immediately prompted questions regarding the salvation of those aliens. In this regard, there have been different positions even within the church, not to mention outside the church. With off-earth beings in mind, some imagine that they may have not fallen like us, while others suppose that they may be almost like us, simul justus et peccator. If the latter were the case, some claim that independent atonements may have taken place for them, whereas others argue that the one incarnation on earth suffices for all creatures, whether on earth or off earth. It was when I was still a doctoral student that I first encountered my two advisors' interesting debate over the extraterrestrial intelligent life, shortly ETI hypothesis. Especially for the past several years, I read many writings, sometimes insightful articles on this topic. Not only the recent book just introduced astrotheology, but also a good number of articles published in Theology and Science, Junghyung, and other journals. Frankly speaking, I'm surprised by the sheer amount of the related literature, as well as by the fact that so diverse issues are discussed from many different perspectives. As for this talk, which will last about 40 minutes, I've decided to make the point as simple and as clear as possible so that we may enjoy lively discussions after the talk. Now, this is the point of my talk today. I propose and defend the thesis that even if there were extraterrestrial intelligent lives, the atoning work of the incarnated Word of God in Jesus of Nazareth on earth would suffice for the redemptive completion of the entire universe, including the ETIs. Meanwhile, regarding the possibility of multiple incarnations, I don't think it should be excluded from the outset. I believe it may find some support from different theological traditions than mine. My point is not that a single incarnation thesis is right and therefore the multiple incarnations thesis is false, but that this is my point. The single incarnation on earth is sufficient for the salvation of the entire universe, and therefore additional incarnations are not required. At the end of this talk, I will briefly discuss this issue again. Meanwhile, the thesis that one incarnation would suffice for ETIs as well as humans has been subject to objections by a number of serious thinkers, both from non-Christians or non-traditional Christians who simply deny the doctrine of incarnation, and also from other Christians who argue for the possibility and even necessity of multiple incarnations. In this regard, I discern two distinctive sets of objections to the single incarnation thesis. The first is the charge of anthropocentrism or geocentrism. This objection is often related to the principle of mediocrity, according to which the Earth cannot claim any special status among numerous planets in the universe. The second objection concerns the fundamental limits of both the physical and revelational efficacy of the Christ event on earth. In my view, both objections may be understood as these different versions of the scandal of particularity. In the middle of the talk, I will analyze those objections and defend my position against them. In the following, I will take a theology of nature approach. I begin with what I believe the traditional faith in incarnation and atonement, and then seek to explain the ETI hypothesis from the perspective of the faith. In fact, regarding the ETI hypothesis, in my judgment, the genuine challenge to the Christian faith does not come from outside, but from the internal diversity or controversy within the church over the nature, cause, meaning of the Christ event. We may focus on the incarnation and atonement. In this sense, I think that different responses to the extraterrestrial intelligent life hypothesis derive from theological differences. Hence, I start by making clear my own theological understanding of the Christ event. This is the outline of today's talk. You can refer to it in the document. In the beginning, I will discuss incarnation and atonement, how I understand them within Christian picture. And then I will discuss objections to the single incarnation thesis. Then the first objection, I will discuss it in terms of the principle of mediocrity and the biblical concept of election. And the second objection in terms of the charge of limited efficacy and the doctrine of n-hypostasis. And lastly, I will briefly mention the possibility of multiple incarnations. And then conclusion. Now I'll begin my theological ideas. The theological tradition that I will bring to the discussion of the ETI hypothesis may be summarized as follows. The incarnation and atonement, the two distinct yet inseparable aspects of the Christ event, when located within the Christian big picture from creation to new creation, are revealed as having a cosmic significance. In the history of Christian thoughts, I distinguish three major paradigms regarding the motives of the incarnation and atonement or redemption. The first paradigm reduces the motive of the incarnation to that of atonement. That is, the incarnation is only for the sake of atonement. The prime example is St. Anselm's Cur Deus Homo. In my view, this paradigm provides us with too narrow a vision to embrace a cosmic horizon in the true sense. It may expand to embrace extraterrestrial moral agents, but there seems no theological room for non-human or non-intelligent creatures. The second paradigm seeks to separate the motive of the incarnation from that of atonement, though it's not easy to find one who is wholly committed to this position. One can detect some traces in the Franciscan tradition, for example, Teilhard de Chardin, Saint Bonaventure, Duns Scotus, and in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, Alexei Nesteruk, Georgy Florovsky, and even in the Reformed tradition to which I belong, especially in John Calvin's supralapsarianism. This paradigm, as it now stands, may easily succumb to the danger of ignoring the pervasive evil in the creation and the need of redemption. However, before moving further, I have to quickly add that most of theologians in this second group may also be regarded as belonging to the next group. For it seems that the motives of the incarnation and atonement are completely uncoupled only in their abstract speculations. The third paradigm affirms the distinct motives of both incarnation and atonement, but subordinates the latter, the atonement motif, to the former, the incarnation motif. According to this paradigm, the motives of atonement and incarnation are distinct from each other, yet intrinsically connected as well. The motive of incarnation concerns the ultimate purpose of creation, that is, cosmic deification, or the consummation of the Trinitarian project of creation, whereas the motive of atonement concerns healing or redeeming the negatives, namely the dark sides of creation, or reorienting the way of creation to the original destiny. The former incarnation presupposes or accompanies the latter atonement, for the completion of creation is not possible without atonement of the negatives in the creation. Meanwhile, the latter atonement is not itself the end or goal, but serves the ultimate completion of creation as an indispensable yet penultimate process. This is my position. I could bring strong supports for it from diverse theological traditions, unless the time limit did not prevent me from doing it. Employing the third paradigm, I believe through the one incarnation in Jesus Christ. By incarnation, I mean not only the birth of Jesus, but also his cross and resurrection. I mean the whole history of Jesus, the Christ event. God has embodied the perfect image of God as the destiny of creation and accomplished the atoning work for the entire creation once and for all, and proleptically anticipated the eschatological consummation of the entire creation. Therefore, I think there seems to be no reason for additional incarnations. To put it otherwise, because the single incarnation is sufficient for the redemptive completion of the entire cosmos, no more incarnation is required. Now I turn to objections to the single incarnation thesis. I can discern two groups in this regard. The first is non-Christians or non-traditional Christians. The second consists of advocates for the multiple incarnations thesis. Both groups agree that the one incarnation on earth is not sufficient, but then the one group argues for the possibility of multiple incarnations, whilst the other refutes the ideas of both one and multiple incarnations. Of non-traditional Christians or non-Christians arguing for the incompatibility of the ETI hypothesis and the Christian doctrine of the atonement, the most frequently mentioned is Thomas Paine, American philosopher and the author of The Age of Reason in the 18th century. He wrote, "To believe that God created a plurality of worlds, inhabited worlds, at least as numerous as what we call stars, renders the Christian system of faith at once little and ridiculous, and scatters it in the mind like feathers in the air. From whence then could arise the solitary and strange conceit that the Almighty, who had millions of worlds equally dependent on his protection, should quit the care of all the rest and come to die in our world, because they say one man and one woman had eaten an apple." Today, Paul Davies, best-selling science writer, is a big mouth speaking out against the traditional doctrine of incarnation and atonement. Here are two quotes from him. The first quotes, "Theologians and ministers of religion take a relaxed view of the possibility of extraterrestrials. They do not regard the prospect of contact as threatening their belief systems. However, they are being dishonest. All the major world religions are strongly geocentric, indeed homocentric. Christianity is particularly vulnerable because of the unique position of Jesus Christ as God incarnate. Christians believe that Christ died specifically to save humanity. He did not die to save little green man." Another quote, "Christianity is the religion most challenged by the concept of extraterrestrial beings because Christians believe that God became a human being. Jesus Christ is called the Savior precisely because he took on human flesh to save humankind. He did not come to save the whales or dolphins or gorillas or chimpanzees or even the Neanderthals, however noble or deserving those creatures may be or were. Jesus Christ was the savior of Homo sapiens, specifically one planet and one species." And we can also find objections to the single incarnation thesis from multiple incarnations camp. Among theologians who do not agree that the one incarnation does not suffice, there are process theologian Norman Pittenger and biochemist and Anglican theologian Arthur Peacock and Roman Catholic theologians Peter Hess and many others. But I will quote from three authors, three theologians. First, Norman Pittenger. How can the Christian gospel, concerned with the salvation of man in this world, have any universal significance when we know that there may well be intelligent life on other planets? Then Arthur Peacock says, what can the cosmic significance possibly be of the localized terrestrial event of the existence of the historical Jesus? Does not the mere possibility of extraterrestrial life render nonsensical all the superlative claims made by the Christian Church about his significance? Peter Hess says the claim arguing that Jesus' death and resurrection are unique and universally valid for the entire universe is parochial indeed. The vast interstellar distances mean that some rational species will never hear of Jesus, even by radio transmission, much less by face-to-face missionary contact. If we try to reach the nearest hypothetically habitable star in our own galaxy. Those objections to the single incarnation thesis tend to emphasize the particularity or parochiality of the Christ event on earth, both incarnation and atonement, and the consequent inescapable limit of its efficacy on the extraterrestrial world. In other words, they highlight the so-called scandal of particularity. The scandal of particularity, in fact, is an age-old theological issue that a great number of prominent Christian thinkers have already struggled to address, though in different contexts. More recently, for instance, regarding the relation between the historical Jesus and Christ of faith, and also in the controversy over religious pluralism. In those objections to the single incarnation thesis still, I discern two distinct arguments, though they are not entirely separate from each other. As I mentioned at the beginning, the first objection, or the charge of anthropocentrism or geocentrism, appeals to the principle of mediocrity, according to which the Earth cannot claim any special status among numerous planets in the universe. The second objection concerns the fundamental limitations of both the physical and the revelational efficacy of the Christ event on earth. Now I turn to each of them in turn. First, I address the charge of anthropocentrism or geocentrism, one version of the scandal of particularity. In his 2014 article, a German philosopher of religion, Christian Weidemann, articulated this objection clearly. He says, of all the intelligent species in the universe, only humankind witnesses God's unique act of solidarity. The human race has a very improbable, exceptional status among species in the universe. The problem with the soteriological geocentrism, he argues, consists in violating the principle of mediocrity, according to which one should reason, according to the principle of mediocrity, he says, one should reason as if one were a random sample from the set of all intelligent in one's reference class. This soteriological geocentrism he compares with the Ptolemaic geocentrism. Then he asks, is there any analogous evidence trumping the principle of mediocrity that Earth plays a special role in God's plan for cosmic salvation? It is that God, or the second person of Trinity, chose our planet among billions of candidates as a stage for his incarnation. To this question, Weidemann's answer is negative, of course. In the same vein, he estimates the probability of the unique incarnation on Earth to be extremely low. He says, the prior probability of finding oneself on exactly the planet God chose for his unique incarnation among billions or trillions of alternatives is lower than even the chance of hitting a lotto jackpot. In response to this principle of mediocrity-based objection, first of all, I would like to emphasize that this is not an entirely new issue for Christian theology. As Anang Millin rightly points out, coping with the reality of the stranger has always been a challenge for the theologians of the book. The challenge of ETI would, in that regard at least, be no different than that of the people's Mesoamerica for the questing Europeans of the 16th century. Next, it is noted that any event of universal significance, if there is such an event, ought to first an event in a particular time and in a particular space. As my theological mentor Ted Peters succinctly writes, something to be real everywhere, it must be real somewhere. So we might argue any redemptive event cannot escape particularity, even if it bears universal significance. I think this is also true of multiple incarnations. I will discuss it later. In a similar vein, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin insists that the universal Christ has had to enter the cosmic history in order to act effectively and to produce final unification. Finally, but not the least, in fact, this is the most important theological response. When the principle of mediocrity is applied inexhaustibly to the Christ event, the biblical concept of election underlining the Christian interpretation of the Christ event is completely ignored. Joshua Morse brings the particularity to that of election in the historical and biblical sense. By quoting from John Revenson and Wolfhard Pannenberg, Morse argues that in the biblical tradition, the election of a particular people is always for the whole world, that is, of universal significance. Morse applies this historical concept of election to the concept of imago Dei as a distinctively biblical description of human uniqueness, and then to the incarnation of God in Jesus the Christ. He says, the divinely elected Messiah represents the whole of Israel. Israel, as God's chosen people, represents humanity, and humanity as a chosen species represents the realm of living creatures. In this way, Joshua argues that the incarnation of God in Jesus Christ as a unique historical election can serve the cosmic universal purpose of God, even for the ETIs, as well as for the non-Christian creatures. Now I move to the second objection. The second objection concerns the fundamental limitations of both the physical and revelational efficacy of the Christ event on earth. This objection is well summarized Peter Hess quotation. Dr. Hess says, the vast interstellar distances mean that some rational species will never hear of Jesus, even by radio transmission, much less by face-to-face missionary contact, if we try to reach the nearest hypothetical hypothetically habitable star in our galaxy. Bob Russell reformulates the issue in terms of the problem of distance, with the assumption of the universality of the Imago Dei and of sin. Russell supposes that, since God loves all that God creates, then God will be present to the moral struggle of life everywhere. Further, God's grace will redeem and sanctify every species in which reason and moral conscience are kindled. In this quotation, I note Russell's appeal to the subjective model of atonement. For Russell's view, however, the one earthly incarnation cannot properly address the needs of the ETIs. It says, quote, ETI could not be included in the revelation efficacy of the incarnation without an ontological incarnation on their planet, embedded in their own species and its histories, unquote. He goes on to say, in this perspective, a single incarnation is insufficient for the redemption of the universe because the participation of the ETI will be impossible. Instead, multiple incarnations are required. Here, it is also to be noted that Russell points out the limits not only of the revelational efficacy, but also of the ontological, or to be more precise, physical efficacy of the one incarnation on earth. Quote, how did the changes in the laws of physics initiated on earth by God spread throughout such cosmic distances? I think he is thinking of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. In response to this sort of objection, I may concede that, physically speaking, there is no historical moment or event which can affect the entire universe due to the limit of the speed of light. Due to the limit of the speed of light. Each light cone has its own restricted scope of influence. So does the human life of Jesus itself. However, I believe the incarnation in which the eternal God enters and is united with a part of the cosmos is a qualitatively and radically different event. Due to its hypostatic unity with the eternal God, the human life of Jesus can have a cosmic universal significance that affects the entire cosmos from beginning to end beyond its own light cone. A British Reformed systematic theologian, Colin Gunton, appeals to the Christological doctrine of an hypostasis to argue for Jesus' universal significance. Gunton says, quote, one of the ways in which the universality of Jesus has been expressed in the dogmatic tradition is by means of the doctrine of an hypostasis, which teaches that the humanity of Jesus takes its particular character from the fact that it is the humanity of the eternal Word. Because it is the Word's humanity, it is real and particular humanity, and yet carries with it significance for the rest of humanity. If the mediator of creation takes flesh, then Jesus is related, as a matter of fact, to all flesh, including ETI, and indeed to the whole order of creation. I think 2 points are noteworthy. First, since the incarnation is an event of encounter between the eternal creator and a temporal creature, its efficacy is not limited by the light cone of the event, but expands beyond it to the entire universe, from its first beginning to its final end. This is not about a physical possibility, but about a theological possibility. This is what I think Gunther means by the ontological relationship of creator and created, grounded in the word and reordered in the hypostatic humanity of Jesus. In other words, Gunther speaks of the objective efficacy of the Christ event in the cosmos cosmic scope, for it has brought about the ontological transformation. I think it refers to an objective change, though not in Russell's sense of physical change. Second, the doctrine of an hypostasis may be reformulated to include a all flesh within the efficacy of the Christ event. In this regard, there's Henry Gregersen's concept of deep incarnation may have further developed this idea. The point is, as Tez indicates, that the carne or flesh of incarnation refers to all that is material. The term flesh, the Greek word sarx, connotes every life form and every species in the history of biological evolution. In other words, Gregor himself says, God's incarnation also reaches into the depths of material existence. Furthermore, the concept of deep incarnation emphasizes not only the physical or biological dimension of the incarnation, but also the dark dimension that is taken on in the incarnation. Here, the traditional theology of the cross is expanded to embrace even the evil in the non-human creatures. As George Murphy says, quotes, "The crucified one is present throughout the universe. He is not only in the majestic and beautiful features of the world, but also shares its sufferings because of the one earthly incarnation fails to grasp the ontological aspect of the atoning work of the incarnate Word of God, overlooking the ontological or transphysical transformation brought about by the Christ event." The primary premise of today's talk is that the one incarnation on earth suffices for the entire cosmos, and yet a brief comment on the possibility of multiple incarnations may be welcomed. As I alluded in the presentation of my thesis at the beginning, I do not know yet exactly why the possibility of multiple incarnations should be excluded from the outset. First, some non-traditional Christians or non-Christians argued against multiple incarnations. For example, Roland Piketty and Christian Weidemann. They are certain of the practical impossibility of simultaneous incarnations in corporeal persons, which due to the time limit I cannot deal in detail, is not worth serious attention on. For it is based on a grave misunderstanding of Chalcedonian doctrines of the one divine person and two natures. Second, although I have not found any convincing reason why additional incarnation is required, it seems to me infringe divine freedom to dogmatically declare that there is no other incarnation but on earth. In this sense, I may agree with Karl Rahner, who says, quote, "It cannot be proved that a multiple incarnation in different histories of salvation is absolutely unthinkable," unquote. Hence, the possibility of multiple incarnations is still open to Christian theology, I think. However, the rationale for multiple incarnation as proposed by its advocates demand critical examinations. The primary motive for the multiple incarnations thesis in my analysis is that the ETIs should have equal opportunity to see and respond to divine self-communication or self-manifestation, or to know God's love and God's will, for they are also part of God's beloved creation. Due to the limit of revelational efficacy of the earthly incarnation, however, its advocates continue to argue additional incarnation for each ETI species is required to ensure proper revelation and, if necessary, proper atonement. This is what Russell says, quote, "God does not want to be without the universe in all its details and life forms, nor does God want the diversity of species of life in the universe to be without the knowledge and the grace of God. I note Russell's emphasis on knowledge. In a sense, this concern for the salvation of the atheists is legitimate and desirable, in my view. However, one should not fail to see that the theological tradition underlying this position is different than what I presented at the beginning. Here, the function of the incarnation is primarily revelational, that is, to communicate God's love and will to them. In addition, the model of atonement adopted here is primarily a subjective one, with almost exclusive emphasis on the knowledge or discipleship on the side of intelligent beings. From my perspective, therefore, I want to make 3 points. First, some of objections to the single incarnation thesis can also be applied to the multiple incarnations camp. For instance, even multiple incarnations can be free neither from the scandal of particularity, nor from the fundamental limits of both physical and revelational efficacy. Second, as David Wilkins and Ted Peters aptly note, the Bible is full of other images of God communicating. So other communicating, other ways of communication than the incarnation. Third, in relation to the ontological transformation objectively brought about by the Christ event, the Christian tradition does not restrict salvation within the church. In this regard, recording the work of the Holy Spirit within and also without the church may be helpful. Kuntan says, quote, "The salvation won by Christ is of such moment as to serve for those who are outside the temporal and spatial limits of the institution, and nothing prevents us from seeking and finding the work of the Spirit in other forms of life. I may add, extraterrestrial intelligent lives than the self-consciously Christian." Now we've come to the final destination. In conclusion, in the face of the ETI hypothesis, I don't think that traditional doctrines of incarnation and atonement need to be abandoned. I believe I can still maintain that the one single incarnation atonement in Jesus Christ is sufficient for the salvation and completion of the entire universe, including ETIs, if they exist. This does not mean all the issues have been resolved, just as there are still heated debates over religious pluralism or the theological significance of the historical Jesus. The questions raised in relation to the ETI hypothesis will stay with us quite a long time. Final comment. Since there is a little probability for us to encounter the real ETIs during our lifetime, I think the ETIs may never be a real challenge to humans. Be that as it may, the theological task still remains to construct a Christian theology embracing the genuinely cosmic horizon as contemporary science presents us. Thank you. This is the end of my lecture. Thank you for listening carefully to my lecture.
Thank you, Junghyung. That was great. I really appreciated the number of people you brought in and how gracious you were in representing their points of view and then giving very helpful critiques and blending them together. It was wonderful. I'd like to publish this in Theology and Science, so we'll talk about it. Just a quick memory of John Barrow, who also died recently. John once said to me, you know, to the question, well, why talk about ETI? It sounds so speculative, and why not worry about earthly issues? He said, ETI, considering the possibility of a contact with ETI, that will help us figure out things about being human that we couldn't otherwise figure out.
Yeah, right.
It's a nice way to, okay, thank you. So it's a good way to ground your hard work in the fact that it really helps you understand who we are as humans. It isn't just science fiction.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Braden to take over for the conversation for the Q&As, and I will urge you to make your questions short. One sentence would be great. We'll see if how many we can get in the next 20 minutes or so. Braden, all yours.
Yep, just a friendly reminder, if you weren't here at the beginning, if you are interested in saying something or have a question, the easiest way for me to know that is for you to click on the reaction button at the bottom of your screen. And then under that, there is a raise hand option. That may not be true if you don't have the latest version of Zoom. If you have trouble doing that, feel free to shoot a message in the chat or to send something to me privately in the Zoom chat, and I will call on people as I see them. Okay, I saw Robert Mann first, so go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for thinking about these things. I'm not at all against thinking about these more interesting and abstract ideas. You partly alluded to this when you talked about the particularity scandal, but one of the more natural questions that would arise, let's say from an honest skeptic, is how do we know that there are not multiple incarnations on Earth? On what grounds would a Christian have to say that Christ's incarnation is at least unique in human history on this planet?
I think that's a very good question, and actually I'm struggling with that question. And the ETI hypothesis is, in my mind, is very closely related to the earthly terrestrial issues. For example, non-human creatures or non-human, for example, non-Homo sapiens hominids, or other non-Christian cultures, for example. And so I mentioned that I do not think that the possibility of multiple incarnations should be excluded from the outset. I think I can say the same thing to the terrestrial phenomenon as well. So you said that we cannot find I think there is an absolute evidence that there is no multiple incarnation on Earth. I think I can say that. Is there anyone who can help me in this regard? Ted, can you help me?
I don't know if I can help you, but I do want to ask a question that may continue the discussion that you just started. You seem to embrace both the uniqueness and efficacy of God's work in Jesus Christ here on earth, as well as the possibility of incarnations on other planets. We know from the Bible that there are many forms of God's revelation. Jesus himself quotes the law, the prophets, the Psalms. So in your view, could God have multiple revelations on every planet, and maybe even to some of the species on our planet that have certain degrees of rationality, you know, such as dolphins? Could God have divine revelations? They might not be the atoning work of the incarnation of Jesus Christ, but they still could be revelations. Would you allow two categories, incarnation and then non-incarnate revelations, to help cover all the bases, do you think?
I think fundamentally I agree with your position, and I find the same ideas in Karl Barton. Karl Barton's book, No Other Gospel. So there is one single incarnation. That's enough for the whole creation. But we may also allow for multiple or many other forms of revelations. I think that's the best option for me right now. As regards the multiple incarnations, I just said that we cannot say that there will be no other incarnations dogmatically. I think it has to be, we have to open that possibility for Christian theology if we respect divine freedom. But when we stick to the biblical witnesses, I think the one incarnation, that's all. And we may open many other forms of revelations. I think it can apply to the extraterrestrial life and to other cultures, other creatures, as you mentioned. That's before.
Okay, Rebecca Gordon, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your talk. This was absolutely fascinating to me. The question I have has to do with your understanding of the salvific power of atonement as being sufficient, even if in one unique single incarnation on one planet in one backwater of the universe. And my question then is, if awareness of that event is not possible for the vast majority of ETIs, probably, and even for the vast majority or for those hominins and Homo sapiens who lived prior to the moment of incarnation, does this imply a form of universalism, a sense that not only is atonement sufficient for all of creation, but that in fact, ultimately, all of creation must be saved? And this says something about damnation. This is my question, because I myself am a universalist. As my friend Marty Stewart said to me years ago, I think Jesus gets them all in the end. And so that's my question. Isn't built into the assumption that atonement can be universal, the assumption that it can also universal in time and space, that it can also be universal in that other sense?
Oh, I think you got the point. I think you, I think that's the real issue that I'm struggling with. And frankly speaking, my position is close to the universalism, but I do not affirm it dogmatically. I just hope for that and I pray for that, but I think we can never say it on the dogmatic ground. We have to respect the divine freedom. So there might be a possibility of some creatures being abandoned and condemned. But I don't know. I don't know. I do not want it. I just hope and pray that God will have mercy on them as well and save them. And that's my prayer and my hope. And that's not my dogmatic position. Yeah.
Thank you.
Lee Minnerly is next. Lee, are you still here? You can unmute and ask your question.
Sorry, I was on mute. I didn't realize that. Can you hear me now? Good. I want to thank you, Dr. Kim, for your contribution tonight. I thought it was extremely interesting and a wonderful example of a contemporary contribution to the ongoing extraterrestrial life debate. And you mentioned early on in your talk that you had studied that body of literature. At least that's the way I interpreted what you said. And my question concerns one of terminology, really, because in the body of literature written primarily, or I should say the analysis of the body of literature written primarily by philosophers, theologians, early scientists, literary figures, etc., over the centuries. In that analysis, the term atonement is one I have not seen. I see the term redemption in quite a few analyses. And my question is the concept of, or how does the concept of atonement that you are discussing differ from the doctrine of atonement that's discussed in the body of literature about the plurality of worlds?
Yeah, I think you are right. The choice of the term atonement is my personal one. I think in the most literature, I find the term redemption more frequently. But I wanted to make my argument consistent. So I consistently use the term atonement, especially in relations to the traditional doctrines of atonement. And if it makes you, makes some confusions, then I think I can change it. Please let me know.
Well, I very much appreciate that clarification. I don't know much about the fine distinctions between atonement and redemption theologically, but I understand that there are some distinctions that could be made. That's why I was a little bit unclear myself. Thank you very much.
Do we have a New Testament scholar in the crowd? Hilastron, I think, is the New Testament word, which is usually translated as atonement because hilastron has something to do with blood.
Yeah.
But I can't remember for sure the word for redemption. Katalege sort of comes to mind, but do we have any New Testament people here could give us a word study on those two terms? I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
And I think that atonement refers specifically to the act of Jesus Christ in changing things, the so-called work of Christ. I wonder if redemption then applies to the effect of atonement.
The result.
The result, yeah. So, but I think we need a New Testament to confirm or disconfirm what I just said.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin Kelly, you're up.
So thank you for that great presentation. If I understand your thesis is that there is a singular particular incarnation with a multiple universe revelation. And I'm wondering what kind of evidence, if you were to able to meet visitors, ETIs from other planets, what kind of evidence would you need to falsify your thesis or to confirm it? What would you be looking for to decide whether this was affirmed or falsified? Would it be other planet Bibles? Is it going to be something that happens on this planet? What would you need for evidence to decide whether your thesis was false or true?
I think that's a very difficult and good question, but I don't think I have an answer. In the beginning, I started with presenting my approach. I called it Theology of Nature. I began with my theological conviction. And so I do not want to base my arguments on other grounds than theology. And I don't think I can put that, put my thesis to a falsification. I don't think so. And let me think. If I meet extraterrestrial intelligent life, I think I may, they are just like us. I think in this regard, I agree with Bob Russell. They are just similar used to Peccator. And they are from the anthropological perspectives or they are in the struggle between sun and evil. I think there might be a slight hint for my thesis. And if they have a longing for some transcendence, fulfillment of their existence, there might be another hint for in relation to my thesis. I'm sorry that I think that's all that I can give you.
Right. I would just like to take the moment to add that while we never know whether we're going to meet an ETI, it's almost certain that we're going to make artificial ones on this planet through AI and robots, and that there may be a moment when an AI or robot says, I am conscious, I have a soul, what about Jesus? Does it apply to me? And so while it seems very abstract, the idea of ETIs, the thing I want to maybe have you think about is, we'll have ETIs on this planet. And what kind of evidence would we need from them to falsify or affirm your thesis? So if robots were on this planet and they were saying they were conscious and they had a soul, and what should they believe? What would you need to believe that the redemption and atonement applied to them versus someone else?
Another big question, I think, and I try to think about the appearance of a strong artificial intelligence, but I have not figured out how to think about it theologically. But one thing I am thinking is that we have to broaden the horizon of our theological discussions. We have to overcome the limitations of our discussion on individual beings. We have to think of the whole creation, the whole history, and we have to pray and hope that the whole creation, the whole history will be transformed and completed. And as a part of it, we will participate in it. So if there if there are strong artificial intelligent beings appear, then they may be invited to participate in the grand vision of the kingdom of God or something like that. Then if they can be invited and participate in that, then we can also speak of their salvation in that regard. This is my tentative idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have time for about 10 more minutes, so raise your hands for Braden.
Next person is Young Park has a question. Oh, okay. It seems that I might need to read the question out. So the question we have is, how could we think whether ETI are sinners or not? Can we think that they have the same ethical standard that we do?
I think in the regarding this question, Bob can help me, and I agree to his ideas a lot. And Bob, can you help me?
Thank you. Well, the approach I take is to say astrobiology assumes the universality of physics, and that constrains what biology can do, and that constrains what neurosciences can do and what psychology can do, and finally theology. So I'm expecting that it's not crazy to say that if you have intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, I mean, intelligent enough to have communities and philosophy, ethics, the whole sort of gamut of civilization, it'll come in a broken form. From thermodynamics all the way up to, neuroscience, it'll be shot through with the faults and failures and tragedies of nature. And frankly, Carl Sagan had the opposite point of view. He thought we're the only species that is corrupt, and that the rest of the galaxy is filled with angelic creatures, which really actually dehumanizes us even more than the notion of the original sin, because it means it didn't have to happen. It happened to us only because of an evolutionary freak that we inherited the reptilian brain along with the mammalian brain. So I really do think it puts us in a kind of global framework to say what tragically manifests itself as what Taylor called universal estrangement in human nature and in, the primates and in killer sharks and all the rest is going to be there in obviously a different morphology, but it's going to be there throughout the galaxy. I think that's why the question is so urgent. And the distinction between redemption and atonement is really important. You could put my point of view of many incarnations to say there could be universal atonement, but not universal redemption, unless you have multiple incarnations. So yes, I think they're going to sin, if you want to put it really quickly, and I think they're going to be saved. I do believe in universal salvation in the eschatological future. Thanks for passing over, Joel. That was real nice of you.
I think I can add a quick comment, and the origin of evil is a big issue for me, and I think the origin of evil cannot be traced back to historical Adam. I think it should be traced back further to the evolutionary ancestor, or I think it should be traced back further to even before the appearance of the Earth or the solar system. We cannot definitely say where it began, but it has something to do with the physical structure of the universe. That's why I think if I meet ETIs, they will be just like us. They will be struggle in moral situations. Yeah.
Okay, I don't have any hands at the moment, so I'm going to take moderator privilege and ask a question myself. Sort of two parts. The first is really quick. I wonder, is there a cultural component to this argument? Is this a problem that individualist cultures tend to deal with? And are there other theological traditions that maybe don't see as strong of a distinction as Western theologians might be making on this issue? And then secondly, I'm wondering, since we're talking about atonement specifically, whether the different modes or models of atonement might be more or less amenable to the idea of a single or multiple incarnations. Moral influence versus substitutionary atonement versus Christus Victor. I mean, I haven't thought through it, but I sort of wonder whether we could classify those as being more aligned with the idea of multiple incarnations or a single incarnation.
Okay, thank you. Could you repeat the first question one more time briefly?
Sure. Whether there's a cultural component to this question, to say that Western or more individualist cultures or maybe struggle with this idea of, is a single incarnation representative enough for the whole, and whether there are other theological traditions that maybe don't have that confusion or that question.
Oh, thank you. I don't think it's related to the Western, specific Western culture. I think it relates to the specifically Christian conviction focused on the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And so we can find the same issues not only in the Roman Catholic or Protestant tradition, but also in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. And there are lively discussions about this issue. And regarding the models of atonement, I think the subjective models as a moral influence or moral exemplarist theory, if one takes that such subjective models of atonement, I think they tend to favor multiple incarnations like Bob, because the important point is that the redemptive effects of should be appropriated by the creatures. So the opportunity should be given. Then we need more incarnations, more opportunities. But I think it cannot solve all the problem, because however, how many incarnations there were, still some creatures, intelligent beings, will be out of that light cones, like my Korean ancestors, something like that. And if we think of the objective models of atonement, like Christus Victor, of satisfaction, of penal substitution, I think if we emphasize the objective side, then the single incarnation would thesis is more favorable, I think. That's enough. Even if there's some people who argue for the limited atonement in the extreme Calvinism, even they, I think, will favor single incarnation hypothesis. And I think the point, so when I preparing for this lecture, the distinction between subjective or objective models of the atonement, which you like better, I think that that affects which one between whether was single incarnation or multiple incarnation. I think that affects that. There are some influences.
Any other questions?
Great. Just a quick follow-up to that. The tradition of on Holy Saturday, Christ's descends to hell, it's oftentimes been used to talk about, extending the gospel universally into the past, right? And so I just do that in terms of the universe, but again, I just want to throw that out.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm going to suggest we begin to wind down with this one last urgent question. Otherwise, I think we're going to be able to thank Junghyung for an excellent presentation. Okay, Junghyung, thank you so much. This has been fabulous, and really want to see it in print real soon. Okay. Well, I wish you all a blessed evening, and thanks for being part of it. See you again in the fall. Bye-bye.
Thank you for inviting me. Great.
Absolutely. Bye.